There's a particular silence a man makes when he's already decided to die. I've been living inside that silence for 11 days when the girl came running out of the heat like something the desert had spit back up. I didn't know her name yet. I didn't know she'd been walking 3 days on a canteen and a fistful of dried corn, or that she'd already buried more people than I had, and me a man of 61. I didn't know she was going to say the 6 words that would come apart in my chest like wet paper. "I'll work for free, take me." What I knew was this. I had 40 days left before the bank took everything my father had bled into the ground. I had 11 cattle where I'd once had 400, and I had a hole dug out behind the barn that I'd told myself was for a new water cistern. It wasn't for a cistern. I'm an old man, and I'll be honest with you the way I couldn't be honest with the priest. She begged me to take her with her whole body, and when I finally answered her, she went so still and so white under all that sun brown that I thought she might drop. Because the thing she was begging to be part of, the ranch, the future, the roof, the work, there wasn't any of it left. I just hadn't told her yet. "I'll work for free, just take me with you." I keep a ledger. I want to say that first because it explains most of what's wrong with me. Not a diary. I've got no use for a man writing down his feelings like a girl pressing flowers. A ledger, columns, dates on the left, and then whatever I decide is worth counting on the right. Head of cattle. Inches of rain, which for 2 years running has been a column of zeros so clean it looks like a joke somebody's playing. Eggs. The days since I'd spoken to another human being out loud, that column got long. I counted the nails I pulled from the collapsed section of the west fence and never used. 41 nails. I've still got them in a coffee tin. A man will hold onto strange things when the big things are being pried out of his hands one at a time. So when I tell you it was the 11th day, understand I mean I'd counted it. 11 days since the letter from the Territorial Bank of Safford came with the word foreclosure printed on it in type so small and polite you'd have thought they were embarrassed. 40 days from that letter, they said, and the drought had done the rest of the arithmetic for them. I was at the rails siding down at Bowie the morning she found me. That's a good hour and a half from my place by wagon, longer with the mule Delia, who at that point in her life had opinions about being asked to work in July. I'd hauled 4 steers down to sell to a buyer named Prout who came through on the Southern Pacific twice a month, buying cheap off men like me who'd rather take $12 a head than watch the animals starve where they stood. $12. My father sold beef fat and sleek for 40 a head in the good years. I wrote the 12 in the ledger and the pencil went right through the paper. I pressed so hard. Prout was a decent enough man for a vulture. He counted out the bills into my palm, licked his thumb between each one, and said, "Roan, I hate to see it." And the terrible thing was he meant it, and it didn't help even a little. I folded the money into my breast pocket. I remember I could feel my own heart going against it through the shirt, thump, thump, like it was trying to spend the money for me before I could get home. That's when I heard the boots. Not boots, a slap of something on the packed dirt, running. I turned, and there she was, coming down the length of the siding past the stock pens with the sun behind her, so all I got at first was a shape. A girl's shape, one arm up shielding her eyes and the other holding something to her chest. She was moving like a person who had already given up on dignity somewhere back down the road. When a body's got nothing left, it stops being graceful. It just goes. Mister. Prout was already stepping back up into the shade of the freight office. He gave me a look that said not my business, and it wasn't, and he shut the door. She stopped maybe 10 feet off, doubled over, hands on her knees, and I could hear her breathing from where I stood, this ragged saw of a sound. She was young. 17, 18, hard to say, because want makes a young face old in the parts around the eyes. Apache, I could see it in her, San Carlos most likely. That was the nearest reservation, and God knew the government had made a desert of that, too. Her dress had been a woman's dress once, gray cotton, but it hung on her like it was made for a bigger, better-fed version of herself, and it probably had been. Her feet were wrapped. Not shod, wrapped in strips of what looked like a saddle blanket, tied with rawhide. She'd walked a long way on those feet. The thing she was holding to her chest turned out to be the canteen. Empty. I found that out because the first thing I did, before hello, before anything, was take a step toward her, and she flinched back so fast she nearly went down, and held the canteen up between us like it was a thing worth protecting. A man learns a lot about a person in the way they flinch. She hadn't been treated gently by the last several men she'd met. I stopped. I put my hands up, palms out, the way you do with a green horse. I'm not going to touch you, I said. My voice came out rusty. I hadn't used it since I'd cussed at Delia that morning. You want water? Wagon's right there. There's a jug under the seat. Go on. I'll stay put. She looked at the wagon. She looked at me. You could watch the calculation happen. It was doing arithmetic same as mine, but hers was a starker column. Is the water worth what he'll want for it? I've thought about that look a great deal in the years since. I've decided it's the loneliest look a human face can make. Then thirst won, the way it always does, and she went to the wagon sideways like a crab, never turning her back to me, got the jug and drank. She drank the way you're not supposed to too fast, and I said, "Slow, slow, you'll bring it right back up." And she didn't slow. And then she did bring it right back up, most of it into the dirt, and stood there heaving with her hand against the wagon wheel and her eyes shining with the shame of it. "'S all right," I said. "Everybody does that. Do it again. Slower this time. There's plenty." There wasn't plenty. There was maybe half a jug, and it had to get me and Delia home. But you say there's plenty to a person in that condition. It's a lie that's really a kindness, which is most of the useful lies there are. She drank again, slower, and this time it stayed down, and something in her shoulders came down an inch. And I understood I was looking at a person who had been one bad hour from lying down in a ditch and not getting up. I should have just given her the water and driven home. I want to be clear that I knew that even then. I had $40 in my pocket and 40 days on my life and a hole dug behind my barn, and the last thing on this earth I had room for was another mouth. I had already, in the privacy of my own skull, done the sum on my own future, and arrived at a number I didn't want to write in any ledger. A man who's decided that has no business taking on a stray. But she wiped her mouth with the back of her wrist and looked at me, and she said it. She said, "You've got a wagon. You've got stock I saw back there you were selling. You've got a place." She said the word place like it was the name of heaven. "I can work. I'm strong. I know I don't look it right now, but I'm strong. I can rope and I can ride and I can cook and I don't eat much. I swear before God I don't eat much." The words were coming faster now, tumbling, a person emptying their pockets to show they've got nothing to hide. "I'll work for free. I don't want wages. I don't want anything but a corner to sleep, and I'll earn even that. Just," and here her voice did a thing, cracked right down the middle, "just take me with you. Wherever it is, just take me. Just take me with you." I've replayed it so many times the words have gone smooth like a river stone. At the time it hit me somewhere I didn't have a name for. Because here was this child, this half-starved girl who'd walked her feet to ribbons, and she was begging me, a dead man walking, a man whose whole estate was 11 steers and 41 useless nails. She was begging me to save her by taking her into the wreck. She thought I was the shore, and I was the thing going down. I opened my mouth. I meant to say no. I'd got as far as the shape of the word. And what came out instead, God help me, I still don't fully know why, was the truth, the whole ugly truth, in a flat voice like I was reading it off the bank's letter. "There's no place to take you to," I said. "The bank takes my ranch in 40 days. I've got 11 head of cattle to my name and no water to keep them alive and no money to buy feed and no way in this world to stop any of it. You're begging to be hired onto a sinking boat, girl. That's my answer. There's nothing to hire you onto. I have seen men take a punch they didn't see coming. That's the closest thing I can compare it to. Everything in her face just stopped. The hope she'd carried 3 days on those wrapped feet, the hope that had gotten her running down that siding in the heat. I watched it go out of her all at once, the way a lamp goes out, and she swayed, and I nearly stepped forward to catch her before I remembered she didn't want to be touched. She didn't fall, she was too proud to fall. But she sat down, right there in the dirt by the wagon wheel, very carefully, like a woman 3 times her age. And she put her wrapped feet out in front of her and stared at them. And she said, so quiet I almost missed it, "Oh, just that, oh, the smallest word there is, the sound a person makes when the last door closes. Now I want to tell you what I did next made me a good man. It didn't. I've thought about it, and I don't think it was goodness at all. I think it was that I had spent 11 days being the only living thing on my land that knew it was dying. And that is a loneliness I would not wish on a dog. And here was another human being who had just been handed the same sentence I was carrying. And something in me could not stand to watch her take it alone in the dirt at Bowie Siding. I sat down next to her, groaned like an old barn door doing it. My knees are shot. I didn't touch her. I just sat, and we both looked at her feet. "Those need seeing too," I said. "The wrappings are stuck to the sores. You leave 'em too long, they go bad, and then you lose the foot, and a person needs both. I've got some carbolic at the house and a decent hand at doctoring. I've stitched more animals than I can count and a couple of men. Won't be gentle, but it'll be clean. She turned her head and looked at me like I'd started speaking Chinese. You just said there was nothing, she said. You said the ranch is gone. It is. Then why? Because 40 days is 40 days, I said. And a person shouldn't spend the ones they've got sitting in the dirt at Bowie. That's all I know. I don't have work for you and I can't pay you, and in 40 days I'll be as bad off as you are right now. But I've got a roof for 40 more days and water, some, and beans, and a jar of my mother's peach preserves I've been saving for no reason under the sun. And you're welcome to a share of all of it for as long as it lasts, and you don't owe me a thing for it, and I don't want to hear another word about working for free. I ran out of breath. It was the most I'd said out loud in a year. That's the offer. It's a poor one. She was quiet a long time. A hawk went over, Delia stamped and blew. Why would you do that? She finally said, and it wasn't really a question. It was more like she was accusing me of something, for nothing. Men don't do things for nothing. And there it was again, that flinch, but living in her voice this time instead of her body. Somebody had taught her that. Somebody had taught her real thorough. Sometimes they do, I said. Not often, I'll grant you not often. But you're going to have to gamble on this being one of the times because your feet aren't going to carry you anywhere else, and I'm the only wagon at this siding. I put my hand out, not to touch her, just palm up and offer she could take or not. Emmett Roan, I said. The ranch is the Rocking R out past the Dews Cabeses. Was my father's. It's a good place. It was a good place. I had to look away when I said that. I'd be obliged to know who I'm sharing my mother's peaches with. She looked at my hand for the length of time it takes to decide whether to trust the entire remainder of your life to a stranger, which is exactly what she was deciding. Then she put her hand in mine. It was all bones and blisters, and it was hot with fever. Nate, she said. It means, she stopped, started again. The Mexicans and the agency men, they wrote it down as Nady on the rolls. Nady, you know what that means in Spanish. I did. I'd spent 60 years in that country. Nady means nobody. Somebody at the agency thought that was funny, she said, and she smiled for the first time, and it was the worst smile I ever saw, all teeth and no light in it. So that's what they called me, nobody Roan would hire. She let go of my hand. You should have just given me the water, Mr. Roan. Emmett, you should have just given me the water and drove off. Now you've gone and made yourself responsible for a nobody, and I've seen what that does to a man. It makes him mean when he finally figures out what it costs him. She got her arms under her and started the long, painful business of standing up. I'll ride in the back. I'm not so far gone I'll take a man's kindness and then bleed him for it too. 40 days. Then I'll be on my way and you'll be shut of me. I got up too. We stood there in the white glare, two people at the bottom of their own separate wells, and I did something I hadn't done since my wife passed, which was that I laughed. Not a happy laugh. A sound with some grief in it, but a laugh. Girl, I said, in 40 days there won't be anywhere for either of us to be on our way to. So we'll figure it out then. Get in the wagon. Front, not the back. You'll cook back there in this sun, and I've got no interest in hauling a body. I climbed up, took the lines, and Delia laid her ears back at the both of us. There's shade under the seat cloth, and there's the peaches. Eat 'em. I've been saving 'em for a good day, and I've concluded there isn't going to be one, so we may as well have 'em on a bad one. She climbed up beside me. She smelled of dust and old blood and fear, the way a person does when they've been running a long time. She got the jar of peaches open with her teeth on the lid, her hands shaking too bad to do it any other way, and she ate them with her fingers, and about halfway through she started to cry without any sound at all. Just water running down through the dust on her face and dripping off her chin onto the front of that too big gray dress. And she never once stopped eating, and I kept my eyes on the road and let her think I didn't notice. I want to tell you the road home was where I learned her whole story. It wasn't. She slept, mostly, fell asleep sitting up before we'd cleared sight of the water tower, the deep dead sleep of a person who hasn't dared to really sleep in days, her head knocking against the seat back at every rut. Once she came awake with a cry, both hands up, and looked around wild-eyed till she placed where she was, and then she looked at me sidelong to see if I'd noticed, and I was very busy watching Delia's ears. She settled back down. I drove slow to spare the ruts. What I learned that first day I learned from small things, the way you learn the weather from the way stock stand in a field. I learned it from how she woke ready to run. I learned it from the way she'd eaten the peaches fast and then ashamed of fast. I learned it from a bruise going yellow-green at the edge that showed at her collarbone when the dress slipped, a bruise the exact shape and size of a man's grip. I didn't ask about it. There are questions you earn the right to ask, and I hadn't earned any yet. But I'll tell you what I did do. When we stopped to rest Delia at the halfway wash, I got down my ledger from under the seat, and I licked the pencil, and I turned to the day's page where I'd already written 4 steers, $48, prute in my cramped hand. And underneath it, I don't fully know why, I wrote one more line. One girl, Nate, free. I looked at that a while. Free. It was the word she'd used, I'll work for free, and it had 2 meanings sitting on top of each other, and I'd meant both of them and neither. Free because I wasn't paying her. Free because for the first time in her miserable young life somebody was giving her something and not sending a bill after. I crossed out free, I wrote priceless. Then I felt like a sentimental old fool, which I was, and I crossed that out too and just left the line blank after her name, because some things you can't put in the right column, and a wise man leaves them uncounted. She was awake, I hadn't heard her wake. She was watching me write, and she'd read it upside down. She could read then better than she'd let on, and she looked at the crossed-out words a long moment. You don't have to keep me on your books, she said quietly. I'm nobody's line item, I told you, 40 days and I'm gone. It's my ledger, I said. I'll write in it what I please. I put it away. And nobody rides on the rocking R for 40 days without going in the book, even a nobody, especially a nobody. Nobodies are exactly the ones that ought to get written down somewhere, seems to me. Otherwise, how's anybody to know they were here at all? She didn't say anything to that, but when I clucked Delia back into her grudging walk, Nate didn't fall asleep again. She sat up straight beside me, watching the Dews Caves' peaks come up blue and enormous out of the shimmer, the 2-headed mountain my ranch was named for. And after a long while she said, in a different voice than any she'd used yet, small and young and almost like a real girl instead of a hunted thing. Is it pretty? Where we're going? And God forgive me, I lied to her again, the good kind of lie, because the truth was the grass was dead, and the tank was mud, and the whole beautiful ruined place was going to belong to the Territorial Bank of Safford in 39 days. Prettiest country God made, I said. Wait till you see it in the evening. The whole west side goes the color of your peaches. She smiled, a real one this time, just barely, first real one. We came in sight of the rocking R just as the sun started down, and I'll be damned if the west side of the Dews Caves didn't go exactly the color I'd promised, peach and rose and a red like the inside of a fruit. And Nate made a sound I won't try to describe, and I realized I hadn't looked, really looked, at my own home in about 2 years on account of a man stops seeing the thing he's about to lose. He can't afford to. It hurts too much to keep looking at it. But I looked at it that evening. Through her eyes I looked at it, and it was, God help me, the prettiest country he ever made. 39 days. That night I doctored her feet on the porch by lamplight. It was as bad as I'd feared, and she gripped the arms of my dead wife's chair and made not one sound while I cleaned the sores, though the sweat ran off her and her jaw stood out like a fence rail. When I was done, she looked at her own bandaged feet and then at me, and she said the thing that told me she was going to be all right, or as all right as either of us was going to get. She said, tomorrow you show me the 11 cows, and the tank and the fences and whatever water you've got left. She lifted her chin at me, and there was the flint in her, the thing 3 hard days on the road hadn't managed to grind out. You've got 39 days, that's not nothing. I've done a lot with a lot less than 39 days, Emmett Roan. And I did it alone, and now there's 2 of us. I opened my mouth to tell her it was hopeless, that I'd run the numbers, that I had that hole dug behind the barn and it wasn't for a cistern. And I looked at her fierce, stubborn, half-ruined face in the lamplight, this nobody the world had thrown away twice over, sitting on my porch telling me not to quit. And for the first time in 11 days, I didn't finish the sum. 39 days. The tank was worse than I'd let her see the first evening. I took her out at dawn like she'd told me to, both of us on Delia because Nate couldn't walk far on those feet yet, her behind me and holding to the cantle instead of to me, keeping that half-inch of daylight between us that I was learning to leave in place. The sun came up hard and mean over the Dews Caves, and I felt her go still when the tank came into view, because there's a particular way water looks when it's dying that a desert person reads without being told. It wasn't a tank anymore. It was a shape where a tank had been. A dish of cracked mud maybe 40 foot across, gone gray and curled up at the edges like old bread, and in the middle a puddle the color of coffee with the cream gone bad, and around that puddle the 11 steers standing with their heads down, not drinking, just standing, the way cattle do when they've given the thing up. "How long's it been dropping?" she said behind me. 2 years, fast this last spring. There a spring feeds it, or just runoff? Spring up the draw. My father dug the tank right where the seep came out of the rock. In a wet year it ran over the top and made a creek clear down to the flats. I heard my own voice doing the thing it did whenever I talked about my father's water, going soft and stupid with old pride. Best watered section in the whole valley, the rocking R, that's why he fought for it. That's why. I stopped. That's why the bank wants it, she finished. Land's worth nothing, water's worth everything. They're not foreclosing on a ranch, Emmett, they're foreclosing on a spring. She was quiet a moment. Somebody's already bought it, haven't they? Whoever gets it after the bank, somebody's already got a buyer lined up. I turned my head. She was 17 or 18 years old, and she'd just seen in 10 minutes what had taken me 2 years, and a lawyer to understand. "How'd you know that?" "Because that's how it always is," she said, and there was that flat old voice again, the one from the siding. "Nobody takes a thing from you because they hate you. They take it because somebody else wanted it and had the papers. Hate would almost be kinder. At least hate remembers your name." She slid down off Delia before I could help her, landed on her bad feet, and made not one sound, though I saw her whole body flinch with it. She limped out onto the cracked mud toward the dying puddle, and the steers lifted their heads and watched her come, and she crouched down. It must have cost her those feet. And she put 2 fingers in the bad water and smelled them and tasted them and spat. "Gyp," she said, "gypsum, it's turning alkali as it drops, that's why they won't drink, it's making them sick before it kills them of thirst. Another 2 weeks of dropping and this'll poison them faster than the drought." She stood, wiped her fingers on the gray dress. "The seep, up the draw, show me the seep." So I showed her the seep. It was a half-hour's ride up a draw so choked with dead brush that Delia complained the whole way, and at the head of it, in a notch of red rock, was the place where for 100 years the water had come up out of the mountain's own body, and it was still coming. That was the thing that had been breaking my heart for 2 years. The seep hadn't quit. Water still came out of the rock, cold and sweet and clean, a thread of it, enough to keep a wet stain on the stone and fill a hoofprint. But the tank was a half-mile down the draw, and in the wet years the ground between had been wet enough to carry the overflow all that way. And now the ground was so dry it drank every drop the seep gave before the water got 20 feet. "The mountain's still giving," Nate said. She had her hand flat on the wet rock, her eyes closed, and something had come into her face I hadn't seen there before, not the fear, not the flint, something older. It never stopped giving, the ground just got too thirsty to pass it along. She opened her eyes. "You've been standing here for 2 years watching water come out of a rock and going home to a dying tank." "There's no way to move it," I said, and I heard how tired I sounded, how beaten. "I did the figuring. To pipe it you'd need pipe I can't buy. To ditch it you'd lose it all to the dry ground before it went 100 yards. To haul it by barrel I'd spend more water in Delia's sweat than I'd carry. I ran every number, girl. There's no number that works." She looked at me for a long moment. "You ran the money numbers," she said. "You didn't run the work numbers. Those are different. A man with money thinks in dollars. A man with nothing but time and 2 backs thinks in days and sweat, and you've got 38 days and 2 backs. She turned back to the seep. "My grandmother's people moved water across ground drier than this before your bank was a hole in the ground. You don't fight the thirsty dirt. You line the ditch so the dirt can't get at the water. Clay. Packed clay and flat stone over the clay. It's slow and it's murder on the hands, and it works. We had a garden at San Carlos Green as anything the agency grew, and they couldn't figure how, and my grandmother wouldn't tell them, because the one time we told a white man how we did a thing he wrote it in a book with his name on it. She said it without heat, just as a fact she'd filed away young. "I'll tell you, though, you gave me peaches." I want to set down plainly what happened over the next stretch of days, because it was the best work of my life, and I didn't know it while I was doing it. That's usually how it goes. We built a ditch, a clay-lined, stone-capped ditch, a half-mile of it down that draw by hand in July, 2 people. One of them an old man with shot knees, and one a girl who couldn't put full weight on her feet the first week. I want you to understand what that means. It means we dug from the first gray light until the heat drove us into shade at midday, and then again from the long slant of afternoon till we couldn't see. It means Nate showed me how her grandmother's people puddled clay, hauling it wet from a bank down on the flats, treading it with our bare feet till it was the right dead smooth consistency, laying it in the ditch bottom and up the sides and packing it, packing it, packing it. It means my hands cracked and bled, and hers did too, and we wrapped them in rags at night and unwrapped them stuck in the morning and did it again. I filled the ledger with it. Day 34, 60 yards clay laid. Day 33, 50 yards hit rock, lost the afternoon. Day 31, rain looked possible, came to nothing, 45 yards. Columns of it, and I noticed along about the 4th or 5th day that I'd stopped writing steers and rain at the top of each page the way I had for 2 years and started writing yards, because yards was a number that could go up. 2 years I'd kept a ledger of a life subtracting itself. Now I had a column that added, and I hadn't understood till then how much a man needs one of those. How a person can starve for the simple animal fact of a number going the right way. She talked while we worked, not all at once. In pieces, the way you tell a thing when you're not looking at the person, when your hands are busy and the sun's on your back and it's safer somehow. I earned it a yard at a time. There'd been a sister, older. Dotest, though the agency wrote that one down too and made it something they could pronounce. The two of them alone after the fever took their mother, and the drink took what was left of their father. And the older sister had done what an older sister does, which is become the mother, become the wall between the young one and the world. They'd left San Carlos together. Nate wouldn't say exactly why they left, but I put it together from the bruise and from the way her voice changed around the word agency man, and I decided that was one of the questions I still hadn't earned and maybe never would. They'd walked out meaning to reach Nate's grandmother's people, who'd gone down into Mexico years back and were said to be living free in the Sierra Madre. 2 girls on foot, across the worst country in the territory, in a drought running from something. Nate was maybe 200 yards of ditch into the telling before she got to the part where the sister took sick. The same bad water, the gyp water, they hadn't known to test it. And how she'd carried Dotest the last day, actually carried her, a person carrying a full-grown person across the desert, and how she'd laid her down in the shade of a mesquite to rest and Dotest had told her to go on, go find water and bring it back, and Nate had gone. She stopped the story there. She was treading clay when she stopped, her feet going up and down in the wet, and she just kept treading up and down, looking at nothing. I didn't say, and when you came back. I knew how that story ended by the fact that Nate had come to Bowie siding alone. I'd known since the first day, really. Some griefs you can smell on a person like smoke. How far'd you have to go for the water? I said instead, quiet, eyes on my own shovel. Day and a half, there was a stock tank on a ranch, a man there. Her feet kept going in the clay. He'd give me water for a price, and I paid it, and I filled the canteen, and I came back fast as I could. Up and down, up and down. It wasn't fast enough, it's never fast enough. You always think if you'd been just a little faster. She stopped treading. She stood in the wet clay with her ruined feet and looked at the seep, at the water coming patient and endless out of the mountain that didn't know or care what it cost to move it a half mile. That's who I was running from when you found me, not the agency. Him, the water man. He decided the price I'd paid the once meant I'd pay it always. He came after me on a horse. I outran a horse, Emmett. 3 days on foot I outran a man on a horse because he had to sleep and I found I didn't. She looked at me. So when I say I'll work for free, when I say I don't want anything, understand I know exactly what free costs. I've paid the not free price. I'll take the ditch and the beans and the peaches over that till the day I die. I stood there in the bottom of the half-dug ditch with the shovel in my bleeding hands, and I understood, finally and completely, what I had said no to killing when I sat down next to her in the dirt at Bowie. And I understood something about the hole behind my barn, too. I hadn't told her about the hole, but she'd found it. Of course she'd found it. She'd been all over the place by then. She knew the Rocking R better in 2 weeks than some men know a place in 10 years. That was just how she was made. She'd found the hole, man-length, man-deep, in the soft ground behind the barn where the old corral used to be, and she'd said nothing about it, the way I'd said nothing about her bruise. We were even that way. 2 people walking wide around each other's worst thing. She brought it up on the 30th day, day 29 in the ledger. We were resting in the shade at midday, backs against the north wall of the barn, sharing the water jug and a can of tomatoes I'd opened as a treat, and she said, not looking at me in the safe not-looking way, "That hole behind the barn, you dug it recent, before you found me." She ate a tomato with her fingers. "It's not for a cistern. You'd have dug a cistern square and lined it and put it where the roof runoff would fill it. That hole's in the wrong place for water and the right shape for a man." She let that sit. A dove was calling somewhere, that low four-note grieving they do. I know what it is, Emmett. I've dug one, for Dotest. I know what that hole is for, and I know it wasn't for anybody but you. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. She'd read it as clean as she'd read the tank. You decided, she said. Before Bowie, you'd already decided. That's why you told me the truth about the ranch instead of just saying no. A man who's decided that has got no reason left to lie about anything. That's why you gave a starving nobody your mother's peaches you'd been saving. You were giving things away. That's what a person does when they've... She stopped. Started over, gentler, and I heard her choosing the words like a person crossing a creek on stones. I've watched somebody give their things away. At the end, Dotest gave me her mother's ring the day before the mesquite, and I didn't understand till after that she'd known that she was all ready. Her voice failed. She pressed the heel of her hand against her mouth hard and got it back. I know the signs. I've seen them once already this year, and I couldn't do anything about it. I found the hole the second day I was here, and I've been sick ever since, thinking I'd wake up one morning and... She couldn't finish it. She didn't have to. I'll tell you what I did. I'm not proud of how long it took me. I sat there against the barn wall with the girl I'd pulled off the road. This girl who had carried her dying sister across a desert and outrun a horse for 3 days, and moved a mountain's water with her bare, bloody feet. This girl who was more alive than any 10 men I'd known. And she was telling me she'd spent 2 weeks afraid she'd lose me to me, a used-up old man who'd quit on his own life before she ever came running down that siding. And I understood that somewhere in the ditch digging, somewhere in the yards going up and the clay and the stories told to the shovel, the hole behind the barn had stopped being mine. I'd stopped, without noticing, being a man giving his things away. I'd started keeping a column that added. I dug it in June, I said. My voice wasn't working right. After the bank letter, I had it all worked out. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of taking the place with me still on it. I was going to be gone before the 40 days and let them foreclose on an empty ranch, and I had to stop. It seemed like the only thing left I got to decide. Everything else was being decided for me. That felt like the one choice I had. It's not a choice, she said fiercely, turning on me now, done with the safe not looking. It's the end of choices. I know because I nearly made it too, on the way back from the mesquite. After, I sat down in the sand with an empty canteen and I thought, there's no one now, there's no reason to stand back up. Dotest's gone and I'm nobody and the desert's easier than this. I sat down, Emmett. She was crying now and furious about it, swiping at her own face like the tears were an insult. And you know what stood me back up? Spite. Pure spite. I thought about the water man and the agency man and every man who decided what I was worth, and I thought, no, you don't get to be right about me. I'm going to live just to prove every one of you wrong. I'm going to live out of spite if I can't do it any other way. She grabbed my wrist, the first time she'd touched me on purpose since the handshake at Bowie, and her hand was hot and hard and gripping like she meant to leave a mark. So you find your spite, old man? I don't care where you get it. The bank, whoever's buying your father's water, the whole world that decided a man's worth nothing once his tank goes dry. You find the thing that makes you say no, you don't get to be right about me, and you hold on to it, and you fill that hole back in. Today, now, before we go back to the ditch, I'm not digging one more yard until that hole is filled. I looked at her hand on my wrist. I looked at her wet, furious face. And I found it. God help me, she was right. It was there. It had been there all along under the tiredness, the spite. The plain animal refusal. You don't get to be right about me. The bank and Prout licking his thumb, and every polite man who decided an old rancher with a dry tank was a number to be crossed off. No. We filled the hole that afternoon. Both of us on our knees, pushing the dirt back in with our bleeding hands because it felt wrong to use a shovel for it, tamping it down. And when it was level, Nate went and got a dead ocotillo and planted it in the soft ground on top, dead as it was. And I said, that ocotillo's dead, girl. And she said, so was I, and so were you, planted anyway. Ocotillo's the toughest thing there is. You'd be surprised what a dead one does when the water finally comes. And we planted the dead ocotillo on top of the filled-in grave. And then we went back and dug more ditch, because there were 29 days left and a column that could still go up. I don't want to tell you it was all mended after that. It wasn't. That's not how a man's dark comes and goes. There were mornings still where standing up was the hardest thing I did all day, where the whole enterprise seemed like two fools trying to bail out the ocean. But the hole was filled, and every time I passed the dead ocotillo, I remembered a girl saying planted anyway, and it turned out that was enough handholds to get from one day to the next, which is all any of us really has. The next handhold, and then the one after that. We finished the ditch on day 12. 12 days before the bank. Half a mile of clay-lined, stone-capped ditch running from the seep in the red rock down the draw to the dead gray tank. And on the evening we set the last stone. We went up to the seep together, and Nate knocked out the little dam of mud we'd built to hold the water back while we worked, and we watched the thread of water start down the ditch. It was the slowest thing you ever saw. Water doesn't hurry. It felt down the clay a foot at a time, finding the low places, and where it passed the clay held it, and the flat stones kept the sun off it, and the thirsty dirt couldn't get its teeth in, and we walked alongside it as it went. All the way down that half mile, the two of us, in the last light with the Dews Cabeses going Peach and Rose behind us, walking a mountain's water down to a dying tank at the speed the water wanted to go, which was patient and certain and unhurried. The way the mountain had been giving it all along, while I'd been too beaten to move it. It reached the tank at full dark. We heard it before we saw it, the small sound of moving water going over the cracked lip and down into that dish of dead mud. A trickle, just a trickle, but a trickle that wasn't going to stop. A trickle that was going to run all night and all the next day, and, if the mountain kept its 100-year promise, for 100 years more. The steers came. In the dark, one by one, drawn by a sound none of them had heard in months, they came and put their heads down to the fresh water running in at the tank's edge, the clean seep water, the sweet water, and they drank. Nate sat down on the tank's stone lip in the dark and listened to the cattle drink, and she didn't cry this time. She laughed, the realest sound I ever heard come out of her. She laughed and laughed with her bleeding hands over her face, and I sat down beside her, close this time, the half-inch of daylight gone, my shoulder against her shoulder, and she let me, she leaned into it. And we listened to 11 steers drink water that a mountain gave and 2 ruined people carried, and I thought, there's 12 days left and the bank still takes it all, and this doesn't fix a single thing, and it's the best thing I ever did in 61 years. And I wouldn't trade this trickle for the whole wet rocking hour of my father's day. Because here's the thing about the number I'd been afraid to finish, the sum I'd stopped doing on the road home from Bowie. I'd had it wrong the whole time. I'd been counting cattle and rain and dollars and days, all the things that subtract. I'd never once thought to count the girl. And the girl, it turned out, was the only figure on the whole page that mattered, and she went in the column that adds, and she'd been adding the whole time, and I'd nearly closed the book before I got to her line. 12 days. The water ran into the tank in the dark, and the cattle drank, and somewhere behind the barn, a dead ocotillo stood over a filled-in grave, and I got out my ledger by moonlight and I wrote, on the page for day 12. Water reached the tank tonight, cattle drinking, and laughed. And under it, where 3 weeks before I'd crossed out free and crossed out priceless and left the line blank. I turned back to that page, Bowie siding, and in the blank space after one girl, Nate, I finally wrote the word I hadn't been able to find. Reason. Just that, it was the only word that went in the right column. I'd been looking for what she cost and what she was worth and how to count her, and she'd never been any of those. She was the reason the hole got filled. The reason a dead man walked his mountain's water down a half-mile of clay. The reason the book stayed open. There were still 12 days. The bank was still coming. Somebody still had papers on my father's spring. 12 days and what the water was worth. The man from the bank came on the 5th day, which was a surprise, because we'd been counting on the 12th. I want to tell it in order, though, because the order is where the meaning is. Those 12 days after the water reached the tank were the strangest of my life. By any accounting, they should have been the worst. The sand running out of the glass, the bank's clock ticking down to nothing, and instead they were the best. That's a thing about grief and dread that nobody warns you of. They don't cancel joy. They sharpen it. Every good hour in those days had a blade to it because I knew how few were left, and a thing you're about to lose you finally see, the way I'd finally seen the west face of the Dews Cabeses through Nature's eyes that first evening. The tank filled. Slow the way the water did everything, but it filled. A foot of clean water over the gray, cracked mud by the 3rd day, the cattle standing in it to their fetlocks and drinking their fill, and then, God love them, just standing, the way animals will when they've had a hard time and something good comes, standing in water like they didn't quite trust it to still be there if they walked away. Nate walked out into the tank in her bare, ruined feet and stood among the steers and put her hand flat on the water, and I sat on the bank and watched her, and I did not write it in the ledger because some things you keep off the books on purpose. Uncounted. Yours. Her feet healed. That was another thing those days gave. The sores closed and the new skin came in pink and tender and she started walking right again. And one morning I came out and she'd got up on Delia bareback and was riding the fence line at a lope, sitting that ornery mule like she'd been poured onto her, her black hair loose and the sun coming up behind her. And she was singing something in Apache low to herself, not knowing I was watching. And I thought, she's going to be all right. Whatever happens to me in this place, she's going to be all right now. She's got her feet back and she's got her spite back and she's singing. And that was worth more to me than the whole valley. I mean that as plain fact and not as an old man's sentiment. We talked in those 12 days about after. That was new. Neither of us had been able to say the word after before. For her it had meant the mesquite tree, for me the hole behind the barn. But now that the hole was filled and the Ocotillo planted, after became a country we could look at. You should go to your grandmother's people, I told her one evening. We were on the porch in my dead wife's 2 chairs watching the light go. In the Sierra Madre, down in Mexico, that's where you were headed, that's where Dotest was taking you. When the bank's done here and I still couldn't say it clean. When this is settled, you take Delia and what money there is and you go find them. You'd make it now. You're strong. Your feet are good. You'd make it easy without a dying sister to carry. I didn't say that either. She was quiet a while. Come with me, she said. I laughed gentle. Girl, I'm 61. I'd slow you down worse than a bad water tank. You built a half-mile of ditch in July, old man. You're not slowing anybody down. She said it lightly, but she wasn't joking. I could hear that. There's ranches down there, free country, my grandmother's people, and Mexicans who need a hand who knows cattle and doesn't ask whose land it was before. You know cattle better than anybody I ever met. You know water now. She turned in the chair to look at me. What's here for you after? The bank takes the place. You going to sit in Bowie and watch the trains? You going to fill that hole back in and then go dig it again once I'm not looking? Come with me. You've got no more reason to stay in this country than I do. Less. My sister's buried here. What's yours? My wife, my father, my whole life, I thought. But I looked at the filled-in hole's direction, at the dead Ocotillo standing black against the last light, and I understood she'd caught me out again. My whole life was a set of graves and a ranch I was about to lose. That wasn't a reason to stay. That was just wait. I'll think on it, I said, which is what a man my age says when a young person is right and he isn't ready to admit it. Think fast, she said. 7 days. It turned out to be 5. The bank man came up the road on the 5th day in a buggy with a fringed top, and there was a second man with him, and I knew the second man was the buyer before he ever stepped down, because he had the soft hands and the hard eyes of a man who bought things other men had bled for. He looked at my father's mountains like he was pricing them. The bank man was called Fessenden. He was almost decent about it, the way Prout had been almost decent, that territorial politeness men used to sand the edges off a robbery. He had papers. He always had papers. Nate had told me that on the first day, and she'd been right. He was sorry, he said. The 40 days weren't up, but his client, he nodded at the soft-handed man, was eager to take possession, and the bank was prepared to offer me a small consideration to vacate early and sign a quitclaim, save everyone the ugliness of the full foreclosure. $100, he said, to walk away clean on the 5th day instead of the 40th. And the soft-handed man walked past all of us, not even listening, out toward the tank, to look at his water, his 100-year spring, the thing he was really buying. I watched him go. Nate had come out onto the porch, and she was standing very still beside me, and I felt her go tense the way she had at the tank that first morning, reading something the rest of us couldn't see yet. That's him, she said, very low, just to me. That's who? The water man. Her voice had gone flat and far away, the Bowie-siding voice, the voice from the bottom of the well. From the ranch on the way back from the mesquite, the one I paid, the one I outran. Her hand found my sleeve and gripped it. Emmett, that's him. That's the man that sold me water for Dotest and then came after me on a horse. He's the one buying your father's spring. The world went very quiet and very clear, the way it does before a bad storm or a bad decision. I looked at the soft-handed man standing at the edge of my tank, my full tank, the tank 2 ruined people had brought back to life with clay and blood and a mountain's patience, and I understood the whole shape of it at once. He owned water. That was his business, buying up the springs and the tanks in a drought country, cornering the one thing nobody could live without, selling it back to the desperate at whatever price their desperation would bear. He'd sold a starving girl water for her dying sister at a price, I didn't want to imagine. And now he'd bought the paper on my father's spring. And in a week he'd have owned it clean, another jewel in a string of stolen water. And he'd have sold it back to men like me at $40 a barrel till the drought broke or we died, whichever came first. And here is where I have to tell you the hardest part, the part I've turned over more nights than I can count. Because in that moment, standing on my porch, I wanted to kill him. I mean that with no exaggeration. I had a rifle inside the door, and I knew where every rock and draw on that place was, and I was a man with nothing left to lose and a filled-in grave behind his barn and a girl beside him whose sister this man's greed had helped put in the ground. It would have been so easy. It would have felt, for about 1 minute, like justice. That was the emotionally heavy thing, the choice, and I want to be honest that it was a real one and not just a thing I say now to sound like I'd never have done it. I stood on the porch, and I did the arithmetic of it cold, the way I'd once done the arithmetic behind the barn. And what stopped me wasn't the law, and it wasn't God, and it wasn't even the certain hanging. It was Nature's hand on my sleeve. Because I looked at her to see if she felt it too, the wanting. And she did, God, she did. It was all over her face, 12 years of it. A lifetime of men who decided what she was worth. But under the wanting there was something else, something she'd learned the hard way, and she said, so quiet only I could hear. Not like that. He doesn't get to make us into that, too. He's already made me into a nobody and made you into a man with a hole behind his barn. He doesn't get this, too. We don't give him this. You don't get to be right about me. Her own words come back around. He'd have loved it, the water man, if the old rancher he'd ruined had shot him. It would have proved the whole thing he believed, that the desert made men into animals and the water made them beg, and there was nothing to any of us but thirst and violence. Killing him would have been the last payment, the not-free price, one more time. So we didn't. We did something else. And this is the part that still, after all these years, makes me believe there's a thread of something like justice woven through the world, faint and slow-moving as a mountain seep, but there. I signed nothing. I told Fessenden I'd take my 40 days, thank you, every one of them, and I'd vacate on the last one and not an hour before, and he could keep his $100. He shrugged. It made no difference to him, 40 days or 5. And the soft-handed man came back from the tank pleased as a cat, having seen his water running clean and cold, and he never once looked hard at Nate, never recognized in this healthy, straight-standing girl on a rancher's porch the starving thing he'd chased across the desert on a horse. That was the first small justice. She'd become someone he couldn't even see. She'd walked clean out of his story. But here's the reversal. Here's the thing the water man didn't know, because soft-handed men who buy other men's springs never trouble to learn how the water actually moves. That seep was on Forest Service land. My father's tank was on our deed. But the seep, the actual source, up the draw in the Red Rock Notch, sat 40 yards past our north line, on the public range, the government land nobody had ever cared about because it was worthless without a way to get the water down to where cattle could reach it. For 60 years it hadn't mattered. The water had run down onto our land on its own in the wet years, and the ownership of the seep itself had been a thing nobody thought about. My father had never bought that 40 yards because there'd been no need. And the ditch, the half-mile of clay and stone that Nate and I had built with our bleeding hands, started on that public land. We'd built the headworks right at the seep, 40 yards past the property line. Which meant the thing that made the spring worth anything. The works, the ditch, the only means by which that water could be got from the useless rock to the valuable tank, wasn't part of the ranch the bank was foreclosing on. It was an improvement on public land, and under the territorial water law that Nate, of all people, turned out to know better than any lawyer. Because her grandmother's people had learned to fight white men with white men's own paper the hard way. The water right belonged not to whoever owned the tank, but to whoever had first put the water to beneficial use by building the works to carry it. We had, 12 days ago, with our hands. I filed on it in Safford the next week. Nate came with me and stood at the land office counter and told the clerk exactly what to write, in the exact words the law wanted, and I signed it. A claim of water right on the seep and the ditch, filed by Emmett Roan, prior in time to any conveyance of the surrounding land. The clerk stamped it. It cost $2. The bank foreclosed on the ranch on the 40th day, just like the letter said. Fessenden took the deed, and the soft-handed water man took possession of 400 acres of dead grass and a stone tank. A stone tank he had no legal right to put one drop of water into. Because the water right, the seep, the ditch, the whole 100-year promise of the mountain belonged to me. He'd bought the cup. I still owned the spring that filled it. And there is no law in any territory that lets a man cross onto another man's water works, or divert another man's filed water right. And the government land the seep sat on wasn't his and never would be. He had, in the end, bought a very expensive dry tank in a drought. I heard later, Prout told me, months on, chuckling around his thumb, that the water man tried everything. Tried to buy the water right off me and I wouldn't sell. Tried to file a competing claim and lost because ours was prior. Tried, finally, to have the ditch declared abandoned, and couldn't, because I rode over from Bowie once a month and ran a bucket of water down it to keep the right alive. 40 yards of somebody else's land and a half-mile of ditch on the waterman's own ranch that he had to sit and watch me walk. Once a month, powerless, because the law was the law and a starving Apache girl had known it better than his lawyers. I never did make him beg. That would have been the not-free price, paid the other direction, and Nate was right that we didn't want it. But I'll admit, God forgive me, that I enjoyed the monthly walk. I enjoyed it right down to the ground. We didn't stay, though. That's the part that matters, the part that isn't about the water man at all. The ranch was gone, the house, the land, my father's grass, the graves. I couldn't have worked it anyway, an old man alone, even if I'd kept it. What I kept was a water right worth more than the ranch had ever been in a drought country, and a man came along inside the year, a real rancher, a young one with a family and a herd and no water, and I sold him a lease on that water for a price that made Fessenden's $100 look like the insult it was. Enough to start over. Enough for two people to start over. Because I went with her. I want to end on that because that's the true end, not the water man, not the clever justice of the law. Those are just the machinery. The end is that in the fall of that year, when the first cool came into the mornings, I loaded what I could carry onto Delia and a second mule I'd bought with the water lease. And Nate and I turned south, toward Mexico, toward the Sierra Madre and her grandmother's people who lived free in the high country where no agency man had ever put a name in a book. I'm writing this from there, from a valley in the Sierra whose name I won't put down, in a country greener than the rocking R ever was in my father's best year, where the water comes down off the peaks like it's got nowhere better to be. Nature's grandmother is real, and alive, and 80-some, and took one look at me and said something in Apache that made Nate laugh so hard she had to sit down, and to this day she won't tell me what it was. We run cattle. Nate and I, not many. We're not greedy. We learned where greed gets a man. We watched it buy a dry tank in a drought. Enough. She ropes and rides and doctors stock and argues water law with anyone fool enough to start it. And she's teaching me the language a word at a time, and I'm teaching her to keep a ledger. Though she says the whole idea of writing down what you've got is a white man's sickness, and she's probably right. She's not a nobody here. I want that written down plain, since a clerk once wrote the other thing. Down here they call her by her name, her real one, the one her mother gave her, and it doesn't mean nobody. It means something about first light, the very first light before the sun, the light that promises the day. Her grandmother told me that. Nate never had in all those weeks of ditch digging. She'd let the agency's cruel joke stand rather than tell me the true beautiful thing, because she'd learned young not to hand a white man anything he might write in a book with his name on it. I earned it, though, eventually, a yard of ditch at a time. I still keep the ledger, old habit, but the columns are different now. I don't count what I've lost anymore. I ran out of use for that column somewhere on the road south. I count mornings. I count the years, and there've been more of them than the hole behind that barn ever meant me to have. That dead Ocotillo would be a live one by now, I expect, blooming red in the spring rains, the way she promised, and I hope the water man hates it. And on the first page, before all the rest, I keep the line I wrote at Bowie Siding, the day a starving girl ran down the length of a rail platform and begged a dead man to take her with him, and stunned herself when he told her there was nothing to take her to. One girl, Nate, reason. She was wrong about one thing that first day. She said I'd made myself responsible for a nobody, and that it would turn me mean when I learned what she cost me. I did learn what she cost me. She cost me the grave I dug. That's the whole bill. That's everything she ever cost. And I'd pay it again every morning of my life and count myself the richest man in 2 countries for the bargain. And if that's an old fool talking, then the desert can have the word fool along with everything else it took. Because it never did manage to take the one thing that mattered. The thing that came running out of the heat on wrapped and bleeding feet, and begged, and would not lie down, and stood us both back up. She's calling me in from the porch now. Supper. Peaches for after. She grows them here. They came up green and thriving from pits she saved off my mother's last jar, the jar we ate on the worst day of both our lives. The trees are heavy with them. I have to go. Some things you don't put in the book. You just go into supper, while there's still someone calling your name, while the light on the western peaks goes the color of a fruit you once shared on a bad day that turned out, against all the arithmetic, to be the first good day of the rest of your life.